תהילה תחת רוח כהה, תחת רוח כהה.
So welcome everyone to this evening's webinar. My name is Mike McNally, and my wife Lynn and I are the UK directors of March of Life. Then we'll share a little bit more later on about March of Life. Our guests tonight, who are Amir and Roggel, and we would just like to welcome them. They are from Israel, and they're going to share their story, and Rosie will be introducing them. So a special welcome to them and Rosie. And so I would like to just spotlight to Amir, and if I can ask you to unmute.
So thank you, Mike. Well, we are going to light the memorial candles in honor of those who died, in memory of those who died in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. It's a real privilege, especially to be with Amir, who lost many, many family in the Shoah. And I also want to remember my husband Colin's family who died in the Shoah. So Amir and Roggel, his wife, who's with us, and I will light the candles now.
שעמדה לאבותינו, והיא שעמדה לאבותינו ולנו, שלא אחד בלבד עמד עלינו לכלותנו, עמד עלינו לכלותנו, והיא שעמדה לאבותינו, והיא שעמדה לאבותינו ולנו, שלא אחד בלבד עומד עלינו לכלותנו, עומד עלינו לכלותנו.
Thank you, everyone. And it is so special, Amir and Roggel and Rosie and everyone who's connected with us tonight, as we take this time to mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. It's really special that we can mark it this way. And many of you, some of you may know about the March of Life, and some maybe don't know about the March of Life. Some who may know more about repairing the breach. But I would just like to share a little bit about the March of Life organisation. It actually began in Germany, and it was initiated by a couple, Jobs and Charlotte Bittner, and they are pastors of a church in Germany, and they began memorializing the death marches in southern Germany with their church members, and who actually discovered that they were descendants of Wehrmacht SS officers. They were descendants of perpetrators, and this broke them to the heart, broke them to the core. And through, since 2007, they have been initiating and helping to mobilize remembrance and memorial marches, which have now spread to over, I think, 25 nations and in hundreds of cities across the world. This all began in 2007, and we were actually, Mike and I were part of that from 2007, and we got, 2016, we really felt the UK needed to take this. We needed to embrace this. And so we began holding marches and vigils across the UK. And I think now we've held them in probably all 4 nations of the United Kingdom, and maybe now in about 8 different cities. Well, I will just say there's the next one. That was in London, and the next photograph. Yes, the March of Life combines the personal working through the past with a public voice against today's anti-Semitism and taking a stand for friendship with Israel. The message of the March of Life stands for remembering, working through the past, giving survivors of the Holocaust a voice, reconciliation, healing and restoration between descendants of the victims and perpetrators, taking a stand for Israel and against modern anti-Semitism. And I've just mentioned these statements. This is one of the reasons I believe that tonight we are partnering with Repairing the Breach. And Rosie and I met a few years ago, and we just found that there was such a common chord between us in what our organisations were about. And many of you know about Repairing the Breach. They do tremendous work. They work very closely with those Holocaust survivors who were negatively impacted by the British mandate, that time period of our history. And they have been holding memorial events, whether it's been in Israel, Cyprus, I think they did one past in Mauritius, they've been in events in Hamburg. It's just such an amazing ministry, amazing work. And at our core, for both of our organisations, we want to lift the veil off. We want to be able to uncover and help people to really learn about what really happened in our past so that we can learn by that and hopefully move towards a better future. So I would like to hand over now to Rosie, and Rosie's going to share with us the historical backdrop of the time. Thank you, Rosie.
So can we have the first slide, please? So, repairing the breach. What breach are we seeking to repair? The breach that occurred between Britain and the Jewish people between 1917, the issuing of the Balfour Declaration, and the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Let's look back a little further and take a glance at British history in the 19th century. Here are William Wilberforce and Lord Shaftesbury, the two famous Christian social reformers. Less well known is the fact that they were leaders in promoting the return of the Jewish people to their ancient homeland in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Since the Puritan revival in the 17th century, many in Britain had been praying for and supporting this vision. The Balfour Declaration, and here we have Lord Balfour, Lord Arthur Balfour, was made in 1917, and it was endorsed by many Christians in the cabinet who embraced this biblical vision. The famous letter to Lord Rothschild stated that His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. But this declaration would not have carried weight without British and Anzac forces gaining victories over the Turks in the land of Palestine, notably the Battle of Beersheba on October the 31st, 1917. We are thankful for the sacrifice of those men who prepared the way for many more Jewish people to return home to their homeland. Vital to the success of the campaign was General Allenby's liberation of Jerusalem from Ottoman Turkish rule. It happened at Hanukkah, 1917. At San Remo in 1920, a treaty was signed by Britain and other powers that ensured that the Balfour Declaration was enshrined in international law. a sacred trust to prepare the way for the Jewish homeland, had been given to the British nation by Almighty God. However, we as a nation failed to fulfill this trust in many respects. One dire mistake we made early on was to appoint Haj Amin Husseini, here we see him on the left, to a place of key influence as the Grand Mufti or Mayor of Jerusalem. The British had been duped into thinking he was a moderate, but he was a radical Islamist. As this picture shows, he later made a pact with Adolf Hitler. Haj Amin Husseini and others incited Arab violence against the Jews and the British. One of the worst atrocities was the Hebron massacre of 1929, when 67 Jews were murdered and many others raped, maimed, and injured. British forces failed to protect the Jewish community, though this was our duty. From 1936 to 1939, Britain was faced with a great upsurge in rebellion from the Arabs, and towards the end dealt with it very severely. In 1936, Lord Peel brought a commission to try and make peace between the Arabs and Jews. And the commission recommended partitioning the land, thus planning to continue the division of the Promised Land as Britain had begun with the Churchill White Paper of 1922. Meanwhile, in Europe, in March 1938, there came a desperate plea from 3.5 million Jews in Poland, asking the British government to not limit Jewish immigration into the land of Israel, then known as Palestine. But tragically, this plea was not heeded when the Jews of Europe so desperately needed a safe haven. Jewish immigration was severely limited. According to the infamous British government white paper of May 1939, only 15,000 Jews a year were to be allowed into the land of Israel over the next 5 years. Also, the sale of land to Jews was greatly curtailed. This white paper was enforced in different ways, including in 1939, the establishment of a detention camp in the land of Israel at Atlit, where tens of thousands of Jewish refugees from the Holocaust were incarcerated by British soldiers. And in 1940, nearly 1,600 Jewish immigrants fleeing Nazi Europe were turned away from the shores of the land of Israel and detained by the British in a prison in Mauritius. Here is the graveyard where 128 are buried. Meanwhile, back in Britain, Winston Churchill led the British Empire and the Allies in the war against Nazi Germany. By a series of miracles, Churchill's inspirational leadership and the courage of many, for instance, at Dunkirk and in the Battle of Britain, the Nazis were held back. However, in Europe, the Nazi Holocaust continued. Here at Auschwitz in 1944, Hungarian Jews are lining up to go to the gas chambers. In many other death camps, millions of Jews were being murdered. Dachau, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Majdanek, Mauthausen, and Treblinka, to name a few. From July to October 1942, around 2 million Jews were murdered in those 4 months. That is around 16,500 a day. And the British were allowing only 15,000 Jews a year to enter the land of Israel. This evening, we are remembering the 6 million, especially those from Amir's family and from my husband Colin's family. Following the end of the war and the British and Allied victory, Churchill lost the election and a new Labour government was elected under Clement Attlee, with Ernest Bevin on the left as the Foreign Secretary. Bevin was very anti-Semitic in his attitudes and policies. However, sadly, church leaders were also implicated in anti-Jewish attitudes. Francis Graham Brown, the Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem during the Mandate, pictured here, claimed, "Zionism is not a fulfillment of prophecy. Israel, the nation, is replaced by Israel, the church." In November 1938, he and other Anglican leaders wrote to the Times newspaper, denying that Palestine was capable of solving the European Jewish problem, saying that since large numbers of Jewish immigrants had arrived, that Palestine had had no peace. The Jewish people being made the scapegoats. I feel an affinity with this bishop, as my father, here pictured growing up during the British Mandate, later became an Anglican leader himself. And I myself spent many years as part of the Anglican Church, which the Zionist organization in London spoke of as the spiritual representative of the mandatory power. This is my father again and my mother. I want to honor their memory. I honor the memory of my father, as he was a man who cared deeply for me, loved life, and taught me to honor the Bible, the Christian community, and all made in God's image. However, sadly, like so many Christian leaders at that time, and even today, he embraced a theology that stated that Jewish people are no longer the people of God, but have been replaced by Christians who are now considered to be God's chosen people, just as the quote from the Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem. I have recognized in myself, even in recent years, attitudes of superiority towards Jewish people that I have had to repent of and renounce. This distorted, arrogant way of thinking runs deep in many British people, Christian and otherwise, and I believe it had a deep impact on our conduct of the British Mandate and influences many British people today. I want to say sorry from the bottom of my heart for the attitudes of my father and of many of our church's leaders then and now. And now I'd like to introduce Amir properly. It's such a delight to have Amir and his wife Racheli here. And Amir, as we've said, is the son of somebody who went through the unspeakable in Auschwitz. And he himself carries the burden of that memory in a very special way. He is particularly connected with the British Cyprus camps because both his parents were held in those Cyprus camps, his mother having been held in Auschwitz before that. So it's with great joy and pleasure that I'd like to introduce Amir to talk to us about his family story and what happened after liberation. It's a real honor to have you with us, Amir and Racheli.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Mike and Lynn, and everyone behind repairing the bridge, and everyone behind March of Life, and everyone in the audience. I really, really appreciate this unique opportunity to share the story of both personal, my family, and the people of Israel from the Holocaust through the establishment of the State of Israel. And we would share with you some parts and even further commemoration. After liberation of Auschwitz, I would ask Racheli, my wife, to talk about next slide, please. Okay, so my father, Jacob Weiss, and my mother, Rivka Tauber, then, here in the picture, they are during the Israel 1948 Independence War, and I would like to ask Racheli to talk about my mother Rivka experience during the Holocaust. Please, next slide.
Hi. What you see on the photo are 4 generations, and at the left side, at the second from left, you see Amir's mother. She was from Hungary, and on 1944 June, on her sweet 16th birthday, she was sent to Auschwitz death camp. And the dress that she's wearing on the photo, I used to make it as a memorial for her when I was asked to do an art about motherhood. For me, I consider her to be I was very proud of her and very, because she was able to raise 2 children after she's been in Auschwitz. And it's a cheerful dress with lots of buttons, and it's hard to see, but when you look closely, you would see it has the imprint, the blueprint of Auschwitz with 400 brackets made from buttonholes. And buttonholes, if you try to fix them, you repair them, there will always be a mark, there would always be a scar. And Auschwitz left its scars on her. You didn't see that because she was a very joyful person. But if she stood in a line with people with a backpack, she couldn't stand in line. That reminded her of Auschwitz. And on the left, next please. On the left side of Auschwitz, there was Canada. Here you can see the buttonholes closely. And you see the blue and white flowers that represent what she had done in Israel when she came back after being in the camp in Cyprus.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Rachel. So I go a little bit to the general period after the war, which is called the Bricha, It's in Hebrew, and the Ha'apala terms in Hebrew representing the return of the Jews. Initially, it was during the war, the escape to the east, mostly Polish Jews, and then return to their towns, and also return of those who were detained in the camps to their towns and villages, to find out that most families were killed, and then they started the movement towards the ports of on the Mediterranean to go to Israel. So this slide is taken from the Amutat Habricha, the organization that commemorates this period, Dr. Miri Nahari. Next slide, please. Here I switch to the specific route of my mother. After Auschwitz, she was actually sent to work in a factory in Germany, and then later to a prison camp in Czechoslovakia. And when the war ended on May 8th, 1945, she went back to her town in Cluj, Transylvania, and with her sister. They both were together all the time, and they found a note from their brother that he also returned and they moved to Israel. Both parents, at the same day that Racheli mentioned, they arrived to Auschwitz. Both parents were sent to the gas chambers. So she started this route. And you can see here that by car, if you take it today, it takes 37 hours. This actually took her and her sister about a year to arrive to Italy, go through various locations in Italy to arrive to the port of Ha'apala. Next slide, please. Here we see the people of during the Bricha movement. Initially, it was spontaneous, and then it was more organized, and people were sent from Israel to help organize a movement of Jewish people towards the ports. And this is the passage in the mountain from Austria to Italy in the winter. Next slide, please. Over here, my mother is actually at the back of the slide with this circle, blue circle, in a place called Villa Emma in Nonantola, Italy. This was a place where a group of young Jewish people from the movement Dror received agricultural education training to be ready to move to Israel. Next slide, please. Over here, the gravestone of my father, we actually made it similar to the gravestone of his grandmother. Racheli discovered this photo, and when my father passed away in 1998, we did this to commemorate the family. Next slide, please. Over here, we can see my grandfather, Kalman Weiss. He was in the Austro-Hungarian army, but during the Holocaust, he was sent to Bergen-Belsen, and over there he died from hunger. Actually, they wrote that he died from some heart failure, but it was from hunger. We know, as we received the testimony of a friend. He married my grandmother in 1918. Next slide, please. Over here, we see my grandmother on the right, Hannah Elena Weiss, and 3 children. My father went to a labor camp in the mountains, but the 3 young children with mother were sent to Vienna, and over there they started the death march towards Mauthausen, and they escaped this death march, and knocked on the door in a village called Grafenwurf of a woman by the name of Maria Grausenburger, who opened the door and let them in. She actually saved them. Next slide, please. So I will let Racheli explain this artwork about this saving of the family.
When I realized that his father, when we were sitting Shiva about his father, I realized that his grandfather was died in Bergen-Belsen. He did not have any of the Jewish ceremonial when you die. He didn't have, he wasn't dressed with afechim. He didn't have kri'ah. Nobody said Shiva on him. So I decided to dedicate the shirt that my husband sent Shiva on his father to his grandfather. Then at that time, I made it aside. I made out of the blueprint of Bergen-Belsen. At that time, we realized there was a righteous among nations, and she, Maria Grausenburger. So I wrote down all the story. Maria was the one who forged for the family, for their identities, and actually one of the son that she did help him, that saved him. He was the one who brought Eichmann to Israel, and they wrote a PhD about my work and asked to meet, to find out some things about the house that was, she will save them. And next, please. And it helped them. And what happened was the daughter of the Maria Grausenburger and the daughter of Helen meeting after 70 years. They were both 10 at the time, and now they're meeting. What they did later, next please, they made, next please. Exactly. They made a statue at the memorial, at the music hall in Grafenwörth, and they did plant a tree. Next, please. At Grafenwörth outside, and in Israel they plant a tree. That's what they usually do for righteous among the nation. The first 2,000 righteous among the nation got a tree, and you can see the tree on the left. It's in Yad Vashem. And next, please. Shalom, one of the children, as I said, he sat with Eichmann in Argentina, took a photo of him, forged his documents, and brought him to Israel. And there is a book about it, The House in Garibaldi Street, and there is a film about it. And on the right side, actually part of my family, the policeman who is sitting next to Eichmann in this box, in this glass box, is my uncle. Next.
So, thank you, Racheli. Next slide, please. So this now goes further to the period of the Bricha, 1945-46, and my father's family, not him, but his mother and 3 children, stayed at Admont DP camp, British zone, and Shalom and my father joined them as well, and they established document forging laboratory over there, and this was their role to help pass Jewish people from the British zone to the American zone towards Western Austria, and this was their job. They passed people and they prepared documents. So at that time, Shalom was engaged in this forging documents activity, as well as my father, Jacob. Just to note that they actually left some memoirs, and my father wrote that they had British officers in the camps, and the British officers knew about their work and didn't like it at all. So several times Shalom was sent to jail for a few weeks, and my father had to hide for a month with clothing of ultra-religious, Orthodox religious person, so they can't catch him. So this concludes the part of the Holocaust and the Bricha for both my mother's family and my father's family. So thank you very much. Let's move on.
Thank you so much, Amir and Raquel. Thank you for sharing this part of your family story. And it was so special as well, Raquel, to have your wonderful pieces of art and how that you can keep the memory alive through these extraordinary pieces. I would now like to invite Tamar Taylor. And Tamar has just recently completed a master's in Holocaust Studies from Haifa University. And she is also a former volunteer at Athlete camp. There's a museum there, and she has volunteered on many occasions for repairing the breach. And Tamar will give us some more historical information on the Habrika. Thank you, Tamar.
Hi and welcome, and thank you for just taking the time to listen to this historical account. And what I'm going to do is just to explain some of the actions of the British who were in Palestine and the actions that they were taking during this time of tremendous movement across Europe of these desperate Jewish refugees whose only wish was to come to Palestine. Now, in the manifesto, before the Labour government took power in 1945, had actually made promises for mass Jewish immigration to Palestine, and were looking very favourably also on the establishment of a separate Jewish state. But once they got into power, very sadly, they reneged on both of these promises that had been made. And Ernest Bevin and Mike, if you just start the photos whenever. Ernest Bevin, the foreign minister who Rosie mentioned, and Clement Attlee, you see there, the new prime minister, actually were very anti-Zionist. They started almost immediately a campaign of disinformation, in a way, of spreading the news that Zionism was nothing more than a communist plot, and all the way through government institutions, from the colonial offices to the military and to the intelligence services. They were convincing themselves that once all these people flooded into Palestine, it would be like opening up the Middle East to the communism. And so right from the very start, they did everything that they could. You can just carry on with the slides. So this is Clement Attlee and Ernest Bevin. These were all people that had this same attitude towards what was going on in Europe, and these floods and floods of refugees, desperate, with nowhere else to go, with the displaced person camps being overcrowded, and just one thought in their minds: to get to Palestine. First thing that the British did was to try diplomatic means. This is Arthur Powers, the head of the general in charge of the Mediterranean fleet. And he really was also determined that the refugees were not going to enter Palestine. And I'll speak later about what was done. But one of the first things was that President Truman himself actually made a plea to the British government in towards the end of 1945, begging them to accept 100,000 Jewish refugees into Palestine, and the government refused. From then on, they began diplomatic measures, sending diplomats all over Europe to try and persuade governments not to allow these desperate Jewish refugees to leave the country. And there's a telegram to the Polish government, where the most refugees were, and just really stating that they would be very happy if they would stop them from leaving Poland. Another thing that they did was to set up a blockade of the entire Mediterranean. And as some of you may know, they began to intercept any of the boats that were coming into that area and then bring them into Haifa and deal with them there. And this was going on all the time, that these refugees from Habricha, the organization, was trying to move these refugees to ports, mainly in Italy and some in France. Another thing that I was shocked to find out myself was that the intelligence services themselves were very involved and working undercover. Many agents were employed as informants, and they were working in many European cities, and they were supposedly uncovering plots, communist plots. This disinformation about the communists carried on throughout 1946 and even into 1947. And they set up a group called the Defenders of Arab Palestine. And many of these agents were actively sabotaging any efforts of Jewish refugees from leaving. They actually bombed and destroyed at least 5 ships that were waiting to take people from ports in Italy. And they posted letters to newspapers and world leaders blaming the Soviet Union for the illegal migration. The government, when they blockaded the entire Mediterranean, and also they were patrolling the whole Mediterranean coastline, finally, in August 1946, they opened up detention camps in Cyprus. As Amir has told you, that's where his parents were sent, to camps in Cyprus. And they began interning all their anyone that landed at Haifa port was sent immediately to the camps in Cyprus. Again, President Truman had pleaded with the government to start legally accepting these desperate people, and again the British government refused. But all of these efforts failed because the refugees continued to arrive and then be sent to the camps in Cyprus. And the world was beginning to notice what was happening in Palestine, and international condemnation began to grow and grow, and pressure was building up with Jewish resistance in Palestine, and particularly from pro-Zionist USA. And the British government had to reevaluate its policies. Talks between the Jewish and Arab leaders was in a deadlock. And so the decision was made to hand the Palestinian problem to the United Nations in February of 1947. And the vote, as we know, many of us know, the vote to partition the land and give the Jewish people a state and the Palestinians a state passed in November 1947. Ernest Bevin, the foreign minister, publicly denounced the Balfour Declaration at this time, and he articulated the British anti-Zionist position. He also didn't believe that the partition plan would actually succeed. But throughout this whole time, Britain continued its efforts to deter the illegal immigration, and They blamed the USA for turning a blind eye to it, for assisting the Habricha in Europe, and they also blamed the communists for facilitating it. And they refused all requests during 1947 to start releasing the refugees from the Cyprus camps. But their will to fight had actually been broken by now, and the decision to evacuate Palestine was made, only opposed by Bevin. And the end of mandatory Palestine came on May the 15th, 1948. And on a very personal note, I believe that this failure of Britain and its ignominious departure from Palestine was brought about by her stubbornness and pride, belief in the might of Great Britain and the Empire, which was already starting to crumble by the end of 1945. But there was also a very strong and deep anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which played out in the actions of Britain. And as a British person, I feel such a sorrow and a shame for the actions of my forefathers. And I just wish to say how sorry I am for those actions. And I pray that more people in Britain would understand and know of this history, which up until now has largely been hidden. Thank you.
It's deeply moving to watch, and I'm sure our hearts are already impacted a lot by what we've already heard. I would like to continue with a bit of the history. As you heard earlier, the British fought the Jewish immigrants, known in Hebrew as Mahabalim. Through military and political means, they imposed a tight naval blockade on the country's shores. They pressured the countries from where those ships were carrying survivors, where they were departing from, to prevent them from setting sail. From 1934 until the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, approximately 140 Jewish immigrant ships sailed to the country's shores. Behind each of them is a fascinating story of imaginable human struggle. Unfortunately, at this webinar, we do not have the time to go into so much detail. Ideally, each one deserves its own webinar in its own right. But these are a few that we would like to mention. Mike, can you go back one? This is the Patria ship. And the Patria was crammed full with 1,900 souls who had been desperately trying to escape the Nazi regime and their collaborators. They had been taken from 3 Jewish immigrant ships, which were captured at the port of Haifa in November 1940, in order to send them to Mauritius. Tragically, the ship sank, with approximately 250 perishing. This was due to an attempt to hinder the boat from sailing by the Haganah, a Jewish resistance movement, and due to an explosive malfunction. Another refugee ship, the Exodus 1947. It sailed from France in July 1947 with approximately 4,500 Holocaust survivors on board, way beyond its recommended capacity of 500. It's hard to fathom in the heat of summer, crammed onto a boat, 4,500 people. At sea, the British used heavy fire to commandeer the ship. Sadly, 2 Jewish immigrants and the captain were killed. Many were injured, and the damaged ship was towed back to Haifa. The British decided to return the Jewish immigrants to their port of departure. Despite their opposition, refugees were sent back to France in ships surrounded by barbed wire fences, and upon arrival, they decided to blockade themselves on the ship, and they refused to disembark. And they went on a hunger strike for 24 days. With France's refusal to help the British, refugees were sent back to temporary camps in Germany. Still in their eyes, the land of Nazism and unimaginable evil. For a number of months, displaced persons in camps all over Europe, as Tamar mentioned earlier, they had nowhere else to go. They protested and staged hunger strikes, and they were heard all over the news. Large protests erupted on both sides of the Atlantic. The story of the Exodus made waves around the world, revealing, sadly, the cruelty of the British to the Jewish refugees. But it contributed to the UN's decision to establish a Jewish state. Sadly, during the Jewish immigration efforts, several tragic disasters occurred. Notably, the drowning of nearly 800 Jewish people on the Struma. Overall, approximately 2,000 Jewish immigrants died on their way to Eretz Israel. Most of the Jewish immigrant ships were captured, with the passengers on board sent to detention camps in Atlit and Latrin. As mentioned earlier by Rosie, Atlit detention camp was built by the British after the publication of the White Paper in 1939, which had severely limited Jewish immigrants' entry to Eretz Israel. The camp was built for holding Jewish immigrants, next picture, who were captured trying to enter the country. And you can see there they are behind the barbed wire. Here, the British authorities incarcerated the refugees behind the barbed wire fences and surrounded them with watchtowers. They had to enter through disinfection barracks. Keep going, Mike. Which for many brought back the trauma of what they had experienced in Nazi-occupied Europe. During World War II, approximately 17,000 Jewish immigrants were detained in Athlete until released in accordance with the monthly quota, with the exception of 1,580 who were deported for 5 years to the prison on the remote island of Mauritius. When the war ended, attempts by survivors from Europe to reach the land of Israel surged dramatically. From January to July 1946, 10,200 were interned in Athlete after failing to make it through the British blockades. In August 1946, the British changed their policy and began deporting the survivors to Cyprus. From August 1946 to 1948, approximately 52,500 Ma'apalim, in Hebrew, the Jewish immigrants were deported to Cyprus. The British even kept many of the men in the camps until January 1949 to avoid them fighting in the War of Independence, even though the mandate had officially ended. Again, as I mentioned earlier, with respect to the survivors and their families who were incarcerated in Athlete or Mauritius, Cyprus, those who are on the ships, we would point out that what has been shared today is only an extreme brief overview of what they have experienced. I'm so grateful that we have Amir with us today. And Amir, we've prepared some questions for Amir. And Amir's going to share about his own family's experience who were detained in Cyprus. Thank you, Amir and Rosie. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mike, please put the presentation so I would answer some of the questions with slides. Yes.
Yeah. So, Amir, how did your parents come to be in the British Cyprus camps and how long were they there?
Okay, so both came separately. Please, next slide. This is a ship. My mother, Rivka Tauber, then later wife, came on the ship Kaf Gimel Yordei Hasira. You see this small ship. They had 790 Ma'apilim, and this was one of the first 4 ships that were captured. The Igloo operation, the British operation, to send ships to send Ma'apilim to Cyprus between August 13 and 18, 1946. They just opened the camps. Next slide, please. This is after my mother was released at the end of 1946. So she was there about 5 months. And this is a newspaper on a bus from Haifa to Athlete detention camp. So they were sent back to Israel after 5 months, but still not released. Took another month or 2 to be released from an additional stay in the camps. Next slide, please. This is a ship of my father and family, which Racheli talked about earlier. It's called Mordei HaGetaot, the rebels of the ghettos. And this departed from Italy, both departed from Italy. This departed from Mola di Bari on May 1947. And there were 1,457 Ma'apilim on this ship deported to Cyprus. My father was released on August 1948. Well after the mandate ended, he had a unique job in the camps, which I will elaborate a little later. So
how many others came with your parents. Can you give us an idea of how
Yes.
many and how many altogether were held in the camps?
So altogether, Lynn mentioned 52,000, and they came on 39 different ships from various ports: Italy, Yugoslavia, France, Bulgaria, and even one of the ships came from Sweden, all the way from Sweden.
Okay. And how many babies were born in the camps? And also, how many died in the camps?
Thank you, Robbie, for this question. These are topics of deep research that I'm doing for the last 8 years or so. Next slide, please. Over to 2,200, actually, it's exactly 2,237 babies were born. Over here, we see circumcision in the camps. Next slide, please. Among the Ma'apilim, 163 died during the camps period between August and August 46 and early February 1949. 50 adults and 113 babies. Now, if you look at the right side, left side, I'm sorry, this is a Margot cemetery, the Jewish cemetery in Cyprus. And you see the graves above. It is very difficult to see names or decipher names on this. So among those died in Cyprus, in 1970, they were all brought to be buried in Haifa. And you may see on the right side at the bottom many graves that says Almoni. Almoni is a no name or known only to God graves, because it was so difficult to find the names after nearly 20 years. It turns to be that about 100 of the babies who were born, many of them died during the birth, so they were not given name. We give names on the 8th day, so they were buried as Almoni. One of, actually, to me, the most important topic of my work in this area is to research and find out all the names of those Almonis, find out where exactly each one is buried, and find the families. And today, since we started some 5-6 years ago, we found 65 names and locations of graves, and we are still working to complete all of them, as long as it would take.
Yeah, can you tell us what your parents and family members shared about their experiences in the camps?
Please, next slide. This is my father on the right side. He actually wrote the memoirs on his work at the camps. He was part of the underground organization of the Haganah called Shurot HaMeginim, where their role was to prepare people to escape the camps, and they escaped in various ways. They escaped through tunnels, as you see on the picture on the right at the bottom, and they also did some practice with guns within the tunnel, so nobody hears this. And my father's unique role was document forging. So he forged documents for those who escaped and for many hundreds, actually, and for the camp commanders. On the left, there is a forged document for the commander of Camp 55, Asher Sapir's name, and here is written as a teacher in Cyprus, so he could move freely in the camps. So my father was very busy with this activity, as well as his brother. Next slide, please. This actually would help us tell about more things that women did. I would ask Racheli to elaborate on this work.
Hi. This work is actually the woman either used to sew, sewing machine, making clothes, and some of them would take the inner part of the tent and would make art of it. And this is Amir's grandmother who made part, you can see there the airplane that find the ship, and then you can see the brain carrier on the left side. The brain carrier used in the camp used to go with the children, going to the beach to accompany the children, like they're going to run away from the camp. They have nowhere to go. And the work on the right that I used this was to commemorate. There were 3 babies who were born on the ship to Cyprus and died on the ship and were buried in the sea. So they are made on diapers, cloth diapers, and sad stories of getting babies to be buried in the sea.
Next, please.
Amir, can you tell us about the living conditions in the camps?
So they all lived in both campuses of camps, summer camps near Karaulos Bay, mostly tents, and in Xilotimbu, near Xilotimbu, they were Nissen huts, which were referred to as winter camps, most of them. There were 12 camps, 5 in the summer camps and 7 in the winter camps. Here we see children at school, which is in a tent. Next slide, please. Here we see the children celebrating Shavuot. They actually didn't act like prisoners of wars. They all prepared towards coming to the land of Israel in many ways. They studied, they did artworks, they prepared, they did preparations for the war. Next slide, please. Next, yes. Here they are making Magen David, Star of David, the young children. Next, please. So here you can see that the camps had a double barbed wire fences, and among them there was a patrol going all the time. So in order to escape, they needed to cut the fence, and they found some places where they had 14 minutes, they could cut the barbed wire and escape, groups of 15, and then put back the barbed wire. This was another way of escaping the camps. Next slide, please. Over here you see the summer camps at the bottom right and the winter camps, the Nissen hut at the bottom left. And this exercise is above the latrinas, the main toilet of the things. There was a scarcity of water there, so they had to limit washing and things. Yes.
Yeah, can you tell us about how they got clothes and water and food into the camp?
Yes. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Go back to the previous one. So it turned to be that the British authorities of the camps considered them as prisoners, as military prisoners, and gave them a limited amount of nutrition by the standard of the military. I think 14 or 1600 calories a day. And the AJDC, the American Joint Distribution Committee, added to it and brought food for children. They barely had food for children. The biscuits that they got were from World War II, leftovers with rotten biscuits, and the powder milk that they got was not useful for children, so they actually made soccer fields, marked soccer field with it, but the AJDC added much food, and some other organization helped them. Yes.
And what were their experiences with the British authorities?
So yes, so this is actually, since I'm engaged in this activity now for over 8 years, and I talk a lot with Ma'apilim. I hear various viewpoints. For most those who came from death camps, like my mother, and from labor camps, for them it was another camp, but this time no threat for life, and they had a solid food supply. So for them it was a time they were upset for not being able to come to the land of Israel where there was war, but they realized that they need to take advantage of the time and prepare themselves. A larger group that came from Romania by two large ships, they came from their homes, from their houses, and for them it was the first time in a detention camp, and many of them say it was a very, very bad experience to come to detention camps. There is a variety of views. However, we learned from many that the soldiers in general, the British soldiers treated them well, and some of the British officers really helped. They realized that this policy of putting Holocaust survivors in camps is not right. So they helped the Ma'apilim. So in general, the overall feeling for the soldiers and the officer was positive. However, there were some cases that soldiers shot some Ma'apilim, so it varies. Yes.
Thank you. Now, you're one of the founders of the Cyprus Ma'apilim organization. Could you tell us what inspired you to start it and, yes, some of your activities?
Yeah. Please, next slide. So, well, like every good thing in my life, this started with Roggel, who actually included us in a trip for 7 years for the camps. And right there, when we came with 3 buses over to Cyprus, we realized that this huge story, which we were not very familiar with. In fact, in schools, we didn't learn much about it. And on the spot, we kind of decided to take this topic and expand it. And we passed a contact list among the 3 buses that most were Cyprus-born people at the age of 70. We passed this, and this is how we started the organization. Now, ever since, the charter of the organization is to commemorate the Ma'apilim and the heritage, Ma'apilim and those who helped them, whether there were volunteers who came from Israel, the seamen who brought them by ships, everyone who helped the Ma'apilim on the route from Europe and North Africa all the way to Israel, and the Ma'apilim. So we commemorate them, and we work to share the heritage with future generations. Among the top activities, so far we conducted 63 in 8 years, 63 conferences. The last one was for the Pan York and Pan Crescent Ma'apilim. We put a medal. A recent one, which we just started in the recent weeks, was a stone, which is Ota Ma'apil, the sign for the Ma'apil, which people put on the gravestone to commemorate their parents as Ma'apilim. We do activities with young people in schools, high schools, and other activities of this nature. So keep us very busy. Actually, it's a full time. Roggel tells me that before this, I worked for Intel for nearly 30 years, and I worked really long hours and hard. She said that I work here now, of course, everything volunteering, a lot harder and a lot more hours. But this is our mission, so we are very serious about this. With the group of 6 other people, we established it, and now we have 1,200 members in the Amuta and about 7,000 people in the organization distribution list and the membership, which haven't signed yet to the Amuta, but we are getting further with this.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful how this heritage is being continued. It's being spoken of now in Israel, and how you have been one of the founders of this organization.
Thank you, Rosie, so much, and thank you all again. I really apologize for this is very emotional for me this evening and this conversation, and I really apologize for overflow in time. And please excuse me for this. I appreciate we both, Racheli and I, appreciate so much your groups, the March of Life and the Repairing the Breach. And we have no words no words to phrase how much we are thankful to all of you.
Yes. So to follow on from what we've been hearing about the Cyprus camps, I'd like to introduce Rachel Rust, who has been many times to Israel, a real friend of Israel. And she has a very special story about her own father, who was out here during the British Mandate. He was an officer in the British Army here in Eretz Israel.
Thank you, Rosie. Well, thank you, Amir, so much for all you've shared. It's been very, very moving, especially because my father was there as Rosie said, in the British Army. So first, I want to express just what sorrow I feel really for my father, because his attitude, to the Jewish people and for their return to their ancient homeland was just so similar to so many in the army. He really resisted it in his heart, and it's something that I've been deeply ashamed of. I mean, it's incredible. Our nation at one point carried, such a biblical understanding concerning the prophesied return of the Jews to Israel, and yet how far we have fallen to actively prevent that from happening. And it's broken many of our hearts. And I'm actually always really grateful to be able to reach out and just express repentance on my father's behalf. So my first trip to Israel was in 2008. And just before going, I watched the film The Forsaken Promise. This portrays the full extent of the shift in the attitude of the British government from the time of the Balfour Declaration in 1917 to that terrible white paper of 1939 and right up to 1948, the end of the mandate. And it was my first exposure to this, and I was horrified to learn of the full extent of what had happened. And actually, as I watched the film, I just felt that in some way my father was linked to the Hadassah Convoy massacre, that terrible massacre of patients and doctors on their way up to the hospital. So when we did go, I knew that I needed to go and visit that site and to pray. And then since then, actually, we've been able to return to many places where significant things have happened at the hands of the British Army. And it has obviously been very necessary for me to confess not just our nation's sins, but my own father's, the British Army, and of course to reach out and to pray. And often God will give us somebody who we can very specifically express my sorrow to. One place we visited was actually the place where the ship, the Exodus, had been taken to and sunk after everybody had been forcibly removed and then returned to France. And this was close to the mouth of the Kidron River. And the place, it was extraordinary. The whole place was deserted. It was silent. There was no life anywhere. And it felt as if the actual landscape carried the pain that the ship had known. Well, we prayed there. And then when we had finished, down the river flew a group of 5 white egrets, past us and out to sea. And then another group came, and another. And it was as if they knew that the place had been cleansed and the way was open because of the prayer that had happened there. So it has been a privilege to have taken part in both the 70th and the 75th anniversaries celebrations at Athlete put on by Repairing the Breach. And in both of those, I've been able to speak on behalf of my father and the British Army. And I find it very humbling at the 70th anniversary, as so many who spoke represented organizations that had been such solid friends of Israel. And when I came to speak, I realized I represented the enemy and was again just so thankful for the opportunity to express my remorse for all that had taken place and my father's part of it. And actually at that ceremony, I sat next to Zahava, who as a child had actually watched the Hadassah convoy massacre from her rooftop as a 5-year-old. So it felt like I'd come in full circle after those 10 years. But I think in many ways, Amir, it was our trip to Cyprus that for me has impacted me the most. We were taken on a tour of the camps by Polly Spiro, whose uncle had been instrumental in helping many Jews escape and return to Israel. And we had the privilege of having Zehafit and Etty with us. Zehafit had been born in one of the camps, and Etty's parents had met and married there. We were able to visit the old British hospital where Etty's mother worked as a midwife and held a memorial service for the babies who didn't survive because of the harsh living conditions. But for me, I think the highlight of the trip was a visit to the chief rabbi in Larnaca. We had taken a plaque with us stating our great sorrow and shame concerning the over 52,000 Jews who had been held captive on the island. And it was my privilege to present it to the chief rabbi after Rosie expressed her repentance on behalf of the British government and me more personally on my own father's involvement. Although mainly stationed in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, he had been very involved in all that had taken place. And as I passed over the plaque to the chief rabbi, I felt God's presence very deeply and sensed that it was a very holy moment. It seemed that the whole of heaven had been waiting for this, a time of acknowledgement of such a deep and unjust wrong. And then 2 years ago, in 2023, as part of the RTB tour marking the 75th anniversary, the final chapter of that story took place in that when we were visiting a community center in Tel Aviv, the head of the center was explaining the history of how the center had developed. But in the middle of his story, he mentioned that his father had been in one of the camps on Cyprus. So both Rosie and I knew we were again to express our deep sorrow for what his father had experienced at the hands of the British. As I stepped forward, I knew I had to get on my knees before him. And as I did this, I felt just such a great sorrowing rise up from deep within my soul. And I believe that this is what the prophet Isaiah meant when he wrote in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 14 in the Bible, "The children of your oppressors will come bowing before you. All who despise you will bow down at your feet and will call you the city of the Lord, Zion of the Holy One of Israel." So it has been a tremendous privilege. And it is in a similar way that we too on this webinar humble ourselves before all who you represent, Amir, all who have suffered so much and your families before you, and express again our deep, deep sorrow for all of your pain. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And you speak on behalf of so many of us. And thank you for sharing such deep personal information about your family and also your journey to date. And yes, and I think I would just like to respond to that in a sense that we're here at this webinar, and you know, maybe what Rachel has said, what Rosie has said, or even Tamara, myself, maybe it has stirred something within you. As Christians, we believe it's important that that we take time to look at our own family history, also our nation's history, and see how that has impacted us, impacted our attitudes, so that, you know, that we can start working through those, face those, and work towards a change in our lives. Mike, if you would like to put the next slide up. There's one seminar, it's a seminar that came out of Germany. It's a Christian counseling seminar that we would like to mention. And the next one there, Mike. Our German Christian friends, they've left no stone unturned per se, and have faced and recognized the past and what their forefathers did, their attitudes of their nation. And this seminar is designed now for all nations, and it's available there. If anybody's interested, you can contact us for more information. There's many other ways that you can look at what you've learned tonight. You know, how can you show your solidarity? How can you show your support? How can you reach out? With the likes of March of Life, I'm just speaking on behalf of them at this point in time, we have around the time of Yom HaShoah, which is Israel's Day of commemoration of the Shoah, and also many of our Jewish communities worldwide remember the Shoah then at that time. And we hold public marches and memorials on that date. So across the UK this year, we will try and organise those, and please stay in contact to see if you can join us and be with us at that time. Also, another thing to mention is the March of the Nations. We have worked very closely with Repairing the Breach with this as well. We have put together tours with Rosie and the team, bringing folk from the UK over to the land of Israel, where we can come together with people from every nation across the world, where we can stand in solidarity, not just solidarity, but it's a time where we really can recognize, we look at our past, we look at how our nations have done wrongs to the Jewish people, and we work towards amending that. There's lots of things that you can also do. There's research you can do. You can travel over to Israel. You can contact RTB. They visit survivors and their families. They also arrange memorials in Israel, Cyprus, other places. We would really, really encourage you, please, to stay in contact with us. You mentioned, or I think it was actually Rachel mentioned, one of the films that she watched, The Forsaken Promise. There's videos, there's films, there's books that you can watch, all those resources, we can put you in touch with them. So please do send us an email, keep in touch, hopefully we can help you on the next steps. And we also hope and plan to have more webinars like this, and also, of course, Zoom encounters with the Maapeline. And I would like now to hand it over to invite actually Rafi Taylor, and Rafi is going to read, as a sign of a prayer, Psalm 121, and then we will hear after that Akenu Kol Bet Yisrael, the prayer for the captives. Sorry folks, we had a slight glitch there, we crashed, but thankfully we're back on. So I was saying, this is like live events. Yes, I did say there about the resources. Please keep in contact with us regarding that. And we would like to take time now. Rafi Taylor is going to read Psalm 121 for us. We want to remember the whole house of Israel this time. We want to remember those that are in captivity, both in spirit and in person. And let's lift up a prayer to them, to Hashem, that he will come with his mercy, come with his deliverance at this time. Thank you, Rafi.
Thank you. Te'alim, Kuf, Kaf, Aleph, Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore.
כל בית ישראל, כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. כל בית ישראל, כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה, ומאפלה ליורה ומשעבוד לגאולה, השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה, ומאפלה ליורה ומשעבוד לגאולה, השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב, השתה בגלה ובזמן
It's just been a really poignant time together here. I'm sure it's touched many of your hearts. It's just a time now where I would like to invite those that feel free, if they want to make a donation to the Cyprus Mayor Palim. I have got a slide here, just you can scan. So this is the PayPal link for donations to the Cyprus Mayor Palim. You can do it through March of Life's PayPal account. If you scan it with your phone, I'll also put a link to the donation page inside the chat, so the chat will be going for a little bit longer after the event is over. So if you want to say hello in there, of course, please do so. And also you can click the link there. There's also an account here for the Habrika, if you feel you would like to give a donation to Habrika. Here is the details of that also. So I think it's just for me to say thank you all for being with us tonight. Again, very powerful event with a lot of information. I will try and upload this if the glitch hasn't ruined it, but I'll upload it to YouTube and you guys can watch it again or share it with those that you trust. So that's us for this evening, I think. Lynn, is that right?
I was just going to say there, if people are having difficulty with the donations, they can email any of either of us, either RTB, Rosie Ross, Repairing the Breach, or March of Life. If they're having difficulties and they feel they want to give a donation, please do not hold back. If you're struggling there with that, do message us and see if we can help you with that. And yes, because I think it's important that we are able to support these organisations. I know there are other organisations that we could contribute to, but just for this evening, we would like to mention these two. Also, Mike, is it possible for us to finish with Hatikva? Are we able to do that?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, just want to put this on the chat. So that's the link on the chat for the Me'apalim, and I'll put another one in just after that one for the Habrika.
We're just so grateful that every one of you could join us, especially to Amir and Raquel and dear Rosie for being there. Thank you so much for all the team, all the Repairing the Breach team. Rachel, thank you, Rachel. Tamara and Rafi, also David there too, Rachel's husband. Thank you, everybody. It's so lovely to see you all. And to all our special guests, whether you're in Israel, the UK, or any other nation, as Mike mentioned, we have recorded this, and hopefully, I know we did have a glitch there, but Mike is a master with technology, so I'm hoping and praying he can do something with it. As soon as we have it ready, we will let you know via email again. And of course, anybody, if you want to join our mailing list, just please let us know. And I think it would be appropriate for us to finish this evening with singing Hatikva. Of course, we're muted. But if you're able to stand, let us stand as we sing Hatikva, Israel's national anthem. Thank you.